Under the golden light of the ballroom, Cale Thornton looked flawless in black tie, sharp, composed, untouchable, but his face carried the stillness of a man already haunted. Beyond the laughter, beyond the jazz, beyond the polished glamour of a criminal empire celebrating itself, fate waited behind a half-open door. And there she was, Meadow, the woman he had once loved in hunger and exile in the ruins of a life stripped bare. Now she stood in a server's uniform, thinner than he remembered, carrying a child beneath her heart while only yards away another woman wore his ring. In that single image, the entire emotional architecture of his world collapsed. Because this story is not merely about love returning, it is about love returning at the worst possible moment, with a child, with silence, with history, and with the kind of pain that no empire can shield a man from. Viewers won't stay for the plot alone. They'll stay because they need to know who survives when destiny becomes cruel.
The temperature in the hall plummets as the elite catch the scent of a fallen god. Emily watches from the shadows, her breath hitching as the legendary Adrian Volkov stands exposed and stripped of his power. This isn't just a social clash. It's a public execution, and she is desperate to vanish before the vultures descend. There is a dark beauty in a disaster that demands an audience. Suddenly, the predator finds his mark. Adrian's obsidian gaze cuts through the chaos, pinning her with a chilling, silent recognition. She has spent weeks documenting his clockwork cruelty, but this expression, this is a primitive hunger far beyond mere business. She is now the lone star in his collapsing galaxy. There is no light in his eyes, only the frozen, lethal panic of a man sinking beneath the waves. With one silent command from his brow, her will fractures. She presses her plastic clipboard against her heart, a fragile, useless shield against the crushing weight of 1,000 mocking eyes. Standing at the altar of his ruin, she faces a man carved from ice and ancient grief. She whispers her name, Emily Carter, a ghost's reminder that she is nothing in his world. But he isn't looking for an assistant. He asks a question that stops the room's heart. Is there another man who claims you? Total isolation. No one waits at home, and no gold ring marks her hand as taken. Her heart hammers against her ribs like a trapped bird as he dissects her. It is a cold, mechanical appraisal. He is not seeking a bride, but a vital organ to transplant into his dying empire. She is a gray shadow in a gallery of peacocks, and that is exactly why she is useful. He asks for the price of her life. When she suggests $60,000, he sneers, offering $5 million instead. The cost? Her name, her soul, and a blood oath signed in this very moment. Time grinds to a halt. $5 million, sterile and untraceable, the fee for walking into the fire. It's a devil's bargain struck beneath the church's vaulted ceiling. Adrian's eyelids don't even flicker. He is buying a miracle to hide the wreckage of a public catastrophe. A cheap dress, a common name, and a vault of gold forever. Is this a cruel joke? No. Watch his face. It's the look of a king watching his towers burn, using frozen logic to build a dam against the flood of his own destruction. She flinches toward the door, but his hand is a shackle of iron. In 5 minutes, the world will see a king stripped of his crown. In his world, being a victim is a death sentence. The sharks are already tasting the salt in the water. Trust is a luxury he spent long ago. He sits in that wheelchair as if it were a throne of broken glass. The accident didn't kill him, but the scent of failure? That will bury him deeper than any lead bullet ever could. A flash of raw pain crosses his face, and for a heartbeat, the beast looks hauntingly human. It strikes a chord in Emily, the invisible girl from the faded photos, the one who spent 28 years being a ghost in her own life. She is the background actor in every scene, building monuments for others while her own world rots. She goes home to the tomb-like silence of an empty flat. A woman who could vanish tomorrow without the world missing a single beat. Now, he is paying her a ransom to stand in the blinding center of the stage. Her warning is a thin, fraying wire. They will see through the curtains, she breathes. They will know I am just a doll you have dressed up to save your pride. He has no hunger for love. This is a tactical retreat. He needs a shield, not a wife. He chose her because she has no skin in the game, no past to sell, and no knife hidden behind her back for when he finally closes his eyes. He draws close, his voice a low, funeral bell. He chose her because she is a ghost in the crowd. It's a cold truth that stings, but the sheer speed of the fall numbs the pain of being used as a blank screen for his shadow play. For once, a titan is being brutally honest. No fairy tales here, just a bank transfer and a script to follow. 12 months of high-stakes theater, faking love for a man who sees her as nothing more than a tactical weapon. A year of living a lie, then vanishing with enough gold to buy a new life. He smirks, a sharp, icy twist of the lips, reminding her the other choice is $75 an hour. A life of begging for crumbs versus a year in a gilded cage. He sees the hunger burning in her eyes. $5 million isn't just money, it's the master key to a world she never dared to touch. The weight of that offer is heavy enough to crush her morals, choking the voice in her head that is telling her to run. For 28 years, she played by the rules and won nothing but a collection of cold nights. Being the virtuous girl was just an invitation for the world to walk over her. Maybe it's time to be reckless. Maybe this poison is exactly what she needs. "I'll do it," she breathes. His face remains a wall of cold stone, but the darkness in his eyes dances. He snaps a command to the shadows. 3 giants who look more like weapons than men, standing frozen in a state of shock. He summons a man named Marcus, whose hands look built for breaking bones. The order is final. Find a dress, do it now, and be back in 10 minutes. Without a sound, the killer and his shadows melt into the cold stone walls of the church. The room spins as the weight of the pact sinks in. She has pawned her future to the king of the abyss. He tells her to drop the clipboard. She must shed her old life to wear the heavy crown of his queen. Her fingers shake as she lets her old self hit the floor with a hollow thud. He grabs her wrist, his hand a heavy anchor in a storm. "No more, boss," he growls. To the world, we are a beautiful, tragic mess of love. His touch lingers like a burn as the clock ticks down. Marcus returns with a white silk shroud. It's a hollow, frantic dressing for a ceremony with no soul, only the cold, steady pulse of a deal being made. The silk hangs heavy and wrong, a costume for a role she never wanted. In the glass, a stranger with dead eyes looks back. Her old boss, Vivian, stands in the doorway, a shadow of pure judgment and shock. Vivian warns her she is just a pawn in a game she will never understand. Emily doesn't blink. For $5 million, she will be whatever he wants. She will walk into the lion's mouth if the price is right. No music, no flowers, just the heavy silence of 200 killers watching her walk. Every step feels like a final heartbeat. Adrian is waiting there, a statue of perfect, terrifying calm. She reaches him, and he takes her hand with a coldness that stops her heart. The priest starts to speak, but one look from Adrian kills the man's courage. "Get on with it," he barks. The marriage is signed like a corporate takeover. No promises of forever, no sweet words, just the quick, cold scratch of a pen in a room full of ghosts. The deal is done. He shows her off to his empire with the silent threat. Accept this new world or burn with the old one. The silence screams. He turns his back on her, leaving his new queen to drown in a sea of sharks without a life jacket. She is Mrs. Volkov now, a name that feels like a stone tied to her neck. She follows him into the dark, seeing a flash of the broken man hiding behind the steel. The iron gates slam shut with finality. He wants to be alone, turning their wedding night into a cold, lonely prison cell. The lies are spreading through the city like a virus. No one believes the love story, but everyone is too paralyzed by fear to say a word. The way back is closed. His last words to her are a dark blessing. Try to remain among the living. Is this a palace or a tomb? The windows are bulletproof glass, built to keep the world out and the secrets buried deep inside. $5 million for 10 minutes of acting? Marcus calls her ma'am, a word that tastes like blood and old copper coins. A golden cage with halls that never end, leading her to a room where the only company is her own growing fear. The change starts tonight. Irina is coming to polish the new prize and dress her for the inevitable fight with the wolves. Fine silk replaces common threads. Diamonds bury the mundane. Her essence vanishes under a fortune of psychological armor. They dwell in separate ghosts under one roof. A contract of ink and paper, solidified by a distance no wealth can bridge. The Lord avoids warmth, they whisper. In the shadows, she weighs the gold against the growing rot in her heart. $5 million, 12 months of forced silence, that is the exact price for her living breath. 1 year performing for a pit of vipers, all for the hope of a check that might buy back her soul. Irina seizes power. The shallow grins have died. The struggle for life begins now in a world of monsters. Costume is defense. One either wears the iron mask or faces the grave. From a terminal drop to absolute shadow rule, your reflection is your oxygen. Draped in midnight blue, the change is total. She has been forged into a blade. A stone reflection, icy steel and jewels lock the cage tight. The gold circle tightens. He commands every pulse in this waking hell. 200 wolves fall silent as she walks into the pit. His icy verdict, passable. Eyes feast upon their hollow silver lie. The decree, grin and bury your spirit. Become a shadow without a name. The trial begins. He warns her to sharpen her teeth before the slaughter. Lies take root. Then enters Julia, a blood-red omen of the coming end. Those jagged prayers are merely blades used to carve the new wife. She mocks her, breathing of the corpses rotting beneath their feet. Old terrors return. His grip turns white against the cold iron of his seat. She chokes in silence while he burns the records of his dark past. A final threat hangs. He demands a masterpiece upon the stage. He scripts a dance, a beautiful lie for the peering vultures. He pulls her close, faking a heat that never touched his heart. His icy breath, let fear be your fuel until the sun rises. 180 minutes chained by law to a room of killers. The show ends. He orders her to dissolve into the darkness. Only an abyss remains as the king retreats into his blackness. Imprisoned by gold bars for 365 endless suns, that $5 million stone is just a receipt for a soul. He creates a void, leaving her to haunt the echoing hollow halls. 12 months to survive the frost of a stranger's merciless house. Rumors of their blood pact drift toward every starving ear. Her friend breaks. She only watches the ledger for the final transfer. A cold messenger brings the master's summons to his private tomb. Life is now a staged march through the circles of power. Her being is a legal debt in this den of beasts. Marcus stands sentinel at the gate of that dark leather room. His gaze cuts her open, though his spirit seems entirely gray. Small talk dies. The monarch dictates his iron, unyielding laws. $50,000 monthly to fund this grand, empty theater. Forbidden zones and a death warrant for any secret that escapes. Play the part perfectly or face the final heavy curtain. Smile for the lens. To shame the king is a death sentence. Touch is forbidden. 2 lives unfolding in separate frozen chambers. See the groom building a wall with every word. She bows, hiding her terror. He tightens the legal chains. Sign, he commands. Let our sins be entombed forever within these cold, silent walls. One stray syllable spells total ruin. She reads, a single leaked confidence, and her existence is forfeited. The air thins as she searches for a reprieve, but the oaths weigh like lead. The iron gates have finally swung shut. That final ink stroke was the bolt sliding home. He retrieves the parchment, his demeanor like ice. Marcus is your shadow from this moment, he declares. Your liberty has expired. She flinches, but he reminds her of her new identity. Is this truly living, she wonders, acting as mere clockwork? For a fleeting breath, his facade fractures, exposing the wreckage beneath. Then the permafrost returns. My spirit perished years ago, he murmurs. This cold transaction suffices. Go, he commands. She flees before her pulse betrays her. His verdict was clinical. She is a mere cog in his grand machinery. She drifts through the manor, mapping out a refuge that echoes like a gilded tomb. 30 chambers of hollow opulence, corridors that stretch into infinity, and silent staff drifting like phantoms. She is a ghost, haunting a mechanism that refuses to see her. Finally, she stumbles into a labyrinth of ancient volumes, a towering temple of narratives reaching for the rafters. This wasn't built for vanity. It was built for endurance. Weathered leather and forgotten gems sit in a beautiful chaos, the sanctuary of a soul who once sought mercy in prose. Adrian lingers at the doorway like a specter, his gravity warping the air. Emily recoils as he enters. He doesn't just fill the space, he colonizes the room's air from his seat. I didn't mean to trespass, she breathes. There is no trespass here, he retorts. By law, this fortress is a shared monolith, a marital anchor for us both. His voice carries the jagged edge of long-held resentment. He pulls a scarred volume from the shelf, his fingers tracing its history. Do you hunt for mercy in fiction? Only when truth becomes a noose. Then consider your docket cleared. He thrusts a copy of Crime and Punishment at her. The spine is pulverized, evidence of a reader who has bled over these pages 50 times. Why this specific tragedy, she asks. It is a clinical examination of the cost of one's sins. It feels appropriate for our theater. Adrian pivots his chair with the grace of a machine. The noon meal is served at 1 o'clock precisely. Irina will guide you. Punctuality is non-negotiable. I have no store of mercy for those who linger. He dissolves into the shadows of the hall before she can speak, leaving her caught between a dark pull and frozen logic. She attempts to lose herself with the prose, but the words bleed into a black smear. Her thoughts circle their hollow union, a performance for the masses while they drift through separate voids. The thought of 12 months in this golden cage feels like a life sentence. Their inaugural lunch is a muted disaster. 2 ghosts at a table tethered by a silence that screams. The quiet in the dining hall is a physical weight, thick enough to stifle the lungs. Is this our daily stagecraft? She asks. Adrian barely registers her, his eyes locked on a screen. Is what? The charade of silent proximity. It's a tragedy. It is a necessity, he barks. The house staff are the audience. Scandal feeds on distance. You will learn the steps of this dance in due time. And if I decline to wear the mask, then this year will become a slow, agonizing crawl through hell. Adrian finally lifts his gaze, his eyes burning into hers. What did you imagine, Emily? A storybook romance? A sudden comrade? I merely hoped for a spark of human kindness. Fine. We are speaking now. Does this satisfy your craving for intimacy? You are only enduring me. There is a grand canyon between tolerance and connection. Adrian's features sharpen into a stone mask. You want connection? Let us skin your history alive. Where were your roots planted? What skeletons are buried in your family's cellar? What nightmares hunt you when the curtain falls? The queries strike like a surgeon's blade, cold and meant to draw blood. He isn't searching for truth. He is whetting his mind against her. Connecticut, she snaps back, her voice like flint. A mundane middle-class life with 2 sisters who still live in the real world. My kin think I've lost my mind marrying a ghost. No grand enigmas, just a life of toil, a wasteland of the spirit, he notes. Rich words coming from a man who had to buy a bride for his empty citadel. She has crossed the deadline. Expecting a storm, she is stunned when Adrian breaks into a sharp, jagged bark of laughter, a sudden flash of humanity that shatters the frost. Touché, he concedes. 2 broken things living in a ruin. At least we find truth in the debris. Do we? It feels more like we are both drowning under the weight of the performance. The fleeting heat dies instantly, replaced by his habitual ice. It must suffice. There is no other exit. He steers away from the table with finality. My docket is full until sundown. Marcus will escort you to the city. You need a wardrobe that reflects the rank of a billionaire's property. My clothes are fine. You dress like a servant. That ends today. He pauses at the edge of the room for a heartbeat. Emily, you asked what I truly desire. He looks past her, eyes fixed on some distant sorrow. I want to stop being a spectacle for just 1 second. I want to be more than a man in a chair, defined by his scars. But the world is deaf to our prayers. I chose to survive. Perhaps you should learn that same lesson. He is gone before she can weigh the depth of his confession. She sits in that expensive void, wondering if he has already yielded. Perhaps survival is the only triumph left. The thought is more terrifying than her marriage oaths. Then begins the fever dream with Marcus, her silent, ever-present sentinel. He shepherds her through galleries where a single gown costs more than a year of her past life. Stylists swarm her like vultures, wrapping her in the armor of the elite. Marcus remains a marble statue, swiping the black card with the boredom one shows at a market. It is a cinematic metamorphosis, but one devoid of joy, heavy with the chill of obligation. Does he always use his gold as a weapon, she muses? Wealth is just a tool to him, Marcus answers. It is gear. You are playing a part, and he is merely providing the costume. My role as the decorative wife. Exactly. Marcus catches her reflection in the glass. I have been by his side for 8 years, long before the disaster leveled everything. He plays the part of the Winter King, but underneath, Marcus stops, weighing his words. He isn't a monster. He has simply been burned by treason too many times to trust the fire again. By Scarlet? By everyone. Marcus guides the car onto the long, secluded drive. The world sees the crown and the vault. They never bother to look for the man. You are the 3rd blade to strike his heart, his blood, his partner's, and then her. He built these walls for a reason. Emily lets the weight of that truth settle. 3 deep psychological gashes. It is no wonder he sees her as a tactical threat instead of a wife. My goal isn't to break him, she whispers. Are you sure? Marcus keeps his focus on the asphalt. Because every time you treat this palace like a dungeon, you draw blood. Every time you count the seconds until the contract dies, it is a new wound. He knows this union is a business deal, but being reminded of it 24/7 is a slow-acting toxin. That truth strikes her with a physical blow. She had been so consumed by her own rage that she missed the broken man behind the mahogany desk. He had reached out in a moment of ruin, bringing her into his inner sanctum, and she had acted like a prisoner awaiting the chair. She wasn't just a guest. She was fueling the fires of his personal hell. I am drowning in this world, she confesses. I have no idea what he needs from me. Then find out, Marcus says sternly. You signed the blood oath. Adrian has been thrown away by enough people. Do not add your name to the list of traitors. That night, sleep is a ghost she cannot catch. Only 3 days into this contract, and she is already failing the exam. Near 12 o'clock, she abandons the fantasy of rest. The manor is a tomb of cold marble and stretched shadows. She finds herself pulled toward the library, searching for an exit from her own mind. The room is dim, and Adrian is there, etched against the glass like a tragic figure in a masterpiece. A book in one hand and a glass of amber whiskey in the other. His gaze meets hers, dark and unreadable in the twilight. Battling the phantoms tonight? He asks. Something like that, she whispers, hovering at the threshold. I can leave if you want to be alone with your ghosts. Adrian simply gestures toward the vacant chair. Stay, he whispers. So she sits, and the two of them traverse the midnight hour in a fragile, shared peace. The air should be heavy, but in the shadows, the sharp edges bleed away. Perhaps the dark allows them to shed the armor they wear for the crowd. Marcus thinks I am crushing your spirit. Emily breathes, by naming the expiration date of this. Adrian's face remains a marble sculpture. The man talks too much. Is he wrong, though? Does truth even matter? Adrian shuts his book with a muffled thud. You're a transient ghost, and we both signed the papers on this transaction. Denying that only sharpens the blade when the end arrives. Emily stands her ground, the light catching the defiance in her eyes. What if I stopped measuring the distance to the exit? What if I chose to inhabit this space rather than just watching the clock bleed out? Adrian's brow twitches, a micro-expression of confusion. Why sink into this rot? Because I'm done being a flicker of light, she whispers, and you, Adrian, are starving for something more than silence. This contract doesn't have to be a tomb for our souls. Adrian's eyes, cold as a winter morning, dissect her every movement. State your terms. There is no hidden agenda, she admits, her voice steady. I am merely trying to breathe. Let us be housemates instead of combatants. Let us speak of something beyond the cold logistics of our arrangement. I am chained to this estate for 365 days, regardless of our animosity. We might as well discover a rhythm that makes this endurance test bearable. Bearable, Adrian repeats, the word tasting like ash. A tragically modest ambition. It is the only one that fits the wreckage of our lives, she retorts. The slightest tremor of a smile haunts his mouth. You are an enigma. Anyone else would be clawing for a settlement or a weapon, yet you plead for a heartbeat. Friendship is a bridge too far, but perhaps we can attempt to be human. Adrian lifts his crystal glass, the amber liquid catching the dim light as he takes a measured drink. Fine. We shall strive for tolerable, but do not expect the walls to come down, Emily. My heart is a rusted mechanism. In what sense, she probes, the machinery of trust. I noticed the gears were jammed, she says, rising from the velvet chair. I shall seek my own sanctuary now. Thank you for the dialogue. Legally speaking, the library belongs to you as well, Adrian calls into the deepening shadows. Emily? She pauses at the threshold of the grand room. Yes? Thank you for the effort. Most would have retreated before the first frost. His tone softens, a jagged piece of glass smoothed by the dark. I am aware this isn't the fairy tale you once imagined. None of us are living the dreams we started with, she answers softly. But we are here. Let's give this year some weight. She vanishes into the hallway before he can retort, Marcus's grim prophecy still echoing in her mind. Do not be the one who breaks him. She likely wasn't the cure for his deep-seated ghosts, and perhaps this entire social experiment was a tragedy from its opening act. But she could offer the mercy of presence. She could ensure this 1-year sentence wasn't a total mental slaughterhouse for both of them. It was a minimalist goal, yet far superior to the alternative of mutually assured destruction in the dark. The subsequent days adopted a new, muted frequency. Emily navigated the social minefields Adrian required with the poise of a seasoned performer. She donned her high-fashion armor with a sharp confidence, radiating warmth for his associates while charting the lethal currents of the upper crust. In the spotlight, they were a seamless, impenetrable fortress, a performance of such chilling conviction that it burned every doubt to the ground. Behind the limestone walls of the manor, the tectonic plates were shifting. Small domestic miracles began to take root. Adrian started appearing from the morning meal in the sun-drenched hall instead of barricading himself in his tomb of a study. Emily met him across the mahogany, and they traded shards of thought on art, on the stars, on the world they both feared. It was merely background noise, yet it transformed the mansion from a crypt into a living space. Eventually, he sought her out in her private quarters, their shared stillness acting as a fragile ceasefire between two warring loners. But the tranquility shattered when Thursday arrived, heavy with the suffocating scent of Manhattan's elite. They were destined for a ballroom where the very floorboards groaned under the weight of dynastic secrets and ancient inherited power. Hours vanished into a fever dream of artifice, directed by Irina's surgical eye for aesthetic dominance. Clad in heavy silks that whispered of inherited fortunes, her reflection became a masterfully crafted deception. From the top of the grand staircase, she saw Adrian. His raw, brutal edges were now sheathed in a tuxedo, cut with the icy precision of a mortician's blade. He stood there like a monarch of frost, the architect of his own lonely kingdom. When he acknowledged her beauty, she cut through the air with a razor-edged wit, challenging his frozen heart. He spat a curse at the city's vapid nature as they walked toward the waiting limousine, doubting her ability to maintain the mask. She simply vowed to play the part of the devoted bride for 4 hours of high society theater. A hollow laugh escaped her lips as she invited him to lead her into the lion's den. The gala was a blinding sea of narcissism, where rare vintages flowed with prices that could sustain a family for an entire year. Charity here was a costume, a tax-deductible prayer for sins committed in the light of day. Though she clung to his arm, she could feel the sharks circling just beneath the gold-leafed surface. What the onlookers masqueraded as respect was actually raw, jagged terror. Conversations turned to static as he passed, a lone skyscraper in a desert of vanity. When he noticed her silence, she admitted she was watching the ghosts of the wealthy. To her eyes, every soul in that room was paralyzed by the sheer, crushing gravity of his shadow. His face remained a fortress of marble, citing fear as the only reliable currency of control. She pushed back, suggesting that a throne carved from dread is simply a more ornate prison cell. Their intellectual duel was severed by a man draped in false charisma and hidden blades. A social predator who claimed he'd been hunting Adrian through the glittering maze all night. The intruder, Vincent, tried to drag the filth of the boardroom into the dance, but Adrian silenced him with a low, predatory growl. Vincent's eyes swept over her as if she were a smudge on a masterpiece. He mocked the idea of Adrian bringing a decorative doll into the inner sanctum of their cutthroat world, erasing her existence with a single poisonous look. Adrian's response rumbled with the frequency of an earthquake, declaring her a vital part of his bloodline, not an accessory. He warned that any further insult would turn their business dealings into a scorched earth campaign. Pale and shaking, Vincent stammered an apology to the new Mrs. Volkov before retreating into the shadows, leaving her breathless under the protective canopy of Adrian's fury. She exhaled a jagged, broken breath, reeling from the violence of the moment, but he brushed it off as a simple tax of holding power. He reminded her that she was now lashed to his legacy, a name that carried a devastating psychological weight. She recoiled at the suggestion of being property, comparing his protection to a high-stakes entry in a ledger, noting how his jaw turned to stone. He spat out a rejection of her words, moving toward the glass doors in search of cold air. They fled to a balcony where the city of Manhattan lay shattered like a silver mirror under the moon's gaze. He leaned against the stone railing, his silhouette carved out of the night, standing against a skyline that seemed to drink the very light from the stars. The quiet stretched until his armor finally cracked, revealing a man who had forgotten the language of tenderness. He confessed his words were often like a frost, even when his heart intended to build a shelter. His claim of ownership wasn't about bondage, but a promise of sanctuary. A vow that she would never be discarded while she stood within his circle. A faint hum of warmth stirred in her chest, but he killed the moment instantly with a sharp, defensive bark. He argued that his protection was purely tactical, a maneuver to close a gap in his defenses. She teased him then, mocking his inability to admit he was human without dressing the sentiment in the dry, dead language of a corporate merger. He refused to let her win the battle for his soul, retreating into the lie of reputation management. She pushed harder, insisting that feeling isn't a flaw, but he snapped back with a voice like grinding stones. To him, an open heart was nothing more than a target for a hitman's bullet. A hard-earned lesson from a lifetime of knives in the back. He swore his empathy was buried in a shallow grave, refusing to dig it up for a mere business arrangement. The words hit her like a physical blow, burning the tiny bridge they had built to the ground. They slipped back into their roles as actors in a cynical play, merely waiting for the curtain to fall on their mutually beneficial lie. Her reply was a ghost of a whisper as she stepped back into the masquerade. She retreated into the neon glow of the gala, her own spirit hardening into something cold and untouchable. The remaining hours were a blur of plastic smiles, leaving her to grieve the foolishness of trying to find a fire inside a man made of mountain granite. She finally grasped the tragedy. You cannot save a man who has turned his own loneliness into a weapon. The ride back to the estate was buried in a silence heavier than the city itself. Once through the doors, she ran for the stairs, desperate to escape the suffocating weight of being near him. His voice stopped her, sounding like the ruins of a cathedral. In the hollow, echoing hallway, he whispered a shattered apology, admitting he had no idea how to exist without war. He confessed that while she was trying to build a world for two, his only reflex was to cast everyone out into the freezing night to save himself. Turning back, she saw him at the foot of the stairs, his mask dissolving into the creeping shadows. He admitted to a bone-deep terror that if he let her matter, her eventual departure would finish him. He was a man held together by grit and wire, terrified that one more loss would turn his entire world to dust. He built a wall of riddles, insisting she merited a soul that wasn't a sprawling labyrinth of historical wounds. Emily sank onto the cold marble of the steps, her posture mirroring his descent. She shared her own nightmare, the terror of becoming just another wandering shade in his mausoleum, fading into the wallpaper for 365 consecutive sunrises. Her words sketched a gilded tomb, a future of wealth where the spirit had simply withered. They shared a vision of horror where their masks became their only truth. His hand found hers, a searing jolt of heat as he exhaled one word, bearable, a heavy stone cast into their unspoken misery. Forget fairy tales. This was a blood pact, a grim vow to weather the storm as one unit. As she returned his grip, the mansion's suffocating air lost its graveyard chill. It wasn't affection, but it was the first jagged stone laid for a new, however trembling foundation of trust. Hairline fractures spiderwebbed across his frozen facade as that solitary word became their shared gospel. The house dynamic shifted. He began inviting her into the mundane, seeking her take on trivial things. He pursued her thoughts on matters offering zero profit, valuing things far removed from his corporate machine. He began to interrogate the very atmosphere of their life, seeking her pulse on the warmth of the lighting or his granite fortress. Her presence took on a tangible weight. The mansion was no longer her cage. She began to animate the hollow halls, eventually taming his sprawling, dust-choked records. The antiseptic air surrendered to the heavy perfume of lilies, eating away at the clinical frost of his gallery-like corridors. He remained a ghost in the wings, watching this slow metamorphosis until 14 days had passed. Then the fragile quiet was shattered. A raw, animalistic howl of agony tore through his sanctuary. She burst in to find him at war with the parallel bars, his abandoned wheelchair watching like a silent, mocking judge. When his muscles finally betrayed him, he crashed to the floor with the resonance of pure ruin. He lay there, broken and motionless, screaming curses at a sky that had abandoned him. He attempted one final, agonizing heave, only for gravity to reclaim him after a measly 3 inches of struggle. She stood frozen, a captive witness to his wreckage. When their gazes collided, his face was a map of strain and a corrosive, bone-deep shame that no amount of gold could mask. He erupted, a wounded lion ordering her to vanish as his fist slammed into the mat in a futile strike against biology. She didn't flinch, guiding his chair toward him while he spat his venom. He hissed that he didn't need an audience for his downfall, but she warned his rage would only leave him shattered. She rolled his mobility aid into place and offered a hand, but his pride remained a wall of jagged glass. With a final, soul-crushing surge of effort, he wrenched his body a foot off the ground, his arms vibrating with a frantic, rhythmic tremor of absolute exhaustion. He held that defiance for 5 agonizing seconds before the crushing reality of his spine dragged him back down. This collapse was silent, the sound of a man's spirit finally splintering into dust. As she approached, he jerked his gaze away, pleading for her not to view him as some fractured toy of fate. Through 730 days of this living purgatory, his lower half had remained stone still and silent. Here was a man who brought markets to their knees, now a prisoner of his own failing nerves. He fought a losing war against his own tears, a colossus reduced to rubble by his own flesh. She commanded him to stop preaching a funeral for a ghost, arguing that while his former self was dead, his sovereign spirit remained. She reframed resilience. It wasn't about the rise, but the stubborn refusal to leave the arena. She locked onto his eyes, hunting for the warrior beneath the tidal wave of grief. She confessed his physical hell was beyond her, yet she knew the psychic rot of living a life that felt like a costume. Sinking onto the floor, she offered a raw piece of her history. She whispered how her mother set a dinner plate for her dead father for 6 months, inviting ghosts to dinner. She described years spent performing for a memory, sacrificing her soul to a man who wasn't there until the cycle snapped. She named the ideal version of oneself as the most lethal enemy a person could ever encounter. Her words settled over Adrian like a heavy shroud, leaving him in a thick, haunted silence. The gravity of her confession hit him with visceral force. A father ripped away at 23 during a moment of joy. She had been draped in a funeral veil for a lifetime, chasing the nod of a man who no longer existed. Their eyes met, a recognition of souls scarred by the same brand of pain. He muttered that warring with one's own history is a battle where no one ever really wins. In a fleeting moment of clarity, he offered a fractured apology for the shadows he let bleed onto her. His features finally softened into total vulnerability as he reached out, silently asking her to help him rise. She walked him home, the air heavy with the weight of things they couldn't say. Their skin grazed, a sudden human spark amidst the frost. He whispered a stunned word of thanks, realizing that almost anyone else would have bolted the moment his crown of perfection hit the floor. Pausing at the door, he asked the question that waits for the dead of night. How do you finally bury the past? She replied that there are no miracles, only the brutal daily grind of breathing. One must stop hunting ghosts and plant their feet in the cold mud of the present. It's a slow, agonizing rewrite of the soul, choosing today until the heart finally stops resisting. Adrian confessed his healing felt like a private, never-ending purgatory. Emily reached for his hand, refusing to let him face his biology alone. Solitude, she knew, was the predator that finished off the wounded. When he questioned her motives, she pointed to their unwritten pact of endurance. With a spark of dark curiosity, she asked to see the lion pacing in his cage. A ghost of a smile brushed his lips as he warned of the coming humiliation, yet he found himself welcoming the weight of her gaze. A heavy silence of shared truth settled over them. Two performers exhausted by the masquerade. He tried to mask his shame with a joke about the scent of failure, but she cut through the fog. To her, it was the smell of rebellion and grit. Perspective was the only currency worth anything here. One saw a tragedy, the other felt the pulse of a living spirit. As he retreated, the rigid ice in his spine finally began to thaw. Left alone with the cold iron, Emily traced the scars of his private war. She recognized that starving hunger to snatch back one's stolen power. Later, the library smelled of aged oak and resin as he followed her inside. He remained a captive of regret, pained that she had witnessed his frailty. To a man who lived as an untouchable king, every bared scar felt like a total surrender to the void. She swept his apologies aside, choosing the sting of raw truth over a polished lie. He called her a strange anomaly, but she struck back with a name, Emily Volkop, shattering the quiet. The air turned brittle as a sharp realization hummed through the empty space between them. She tried to retreat behind the safety of legal jargon, but the tremor in the air betrayed her. A flash of life returned to his eyes. He gave her his true name, telling her to take whatever comfort she needed to survive their pact. He was handing her the keys to their shared truth. Setting her book down, she launched a lethal question. What did he really want from this transaction? Stripped of his gold and paper armor, he finally let the truth bleed out. He was simply exhausted from haunting his own estate as a solitary, invisible ghost. He was starving for a witness who looked past the headlines and the perceived monster. He craved the friction of human connection, a break from the icy math of his status. She scoffed at the idea of normalcy, but promised to build him a sanctuary that finally felt like a home. The tide had turned. Two ghosts were finally speaking without the weight of their masks. Leaning back in her chair, she admitted a growing fondness for this hushed world. She saw grace in a man struggling against both epic poetry and his own failing nerves. The human was finally surfacing. All that wealth was just background static now. Adrian looked away, warning that their boundaries were melting into chaos. She was waking up hungers that were never in the contract. His voice wavered as he admitted her mercy was dismantling his walls, making him lose track of the ending. She suggested a brief truce with the clock, but he severed the thought with clinical, icy precision. He warned her against the heart's hallucinations, labeling her warmth as simple boredom. His truth was a jagged edge. This was all a dream, and she must wake up. She rose, holding herself together as her world quietly splintered. That reminder of her place was a jagged pill to swallow. Though he faltered, trying to soften the blow, she was already gone. She surrendered to his frozen rules, fleeing to her room before her pride finally gave way. She lashed out at her own heart, forced to respect his brutal, upfront honesty. She was the one who mistook a business deal for a destiny. For 72 hours, she lived as a shadow, avoiding the library. He honored the distance, a cold guardian who wouldn't chase what he discarded. He maintained the silence, letting the frost thicken. By the fourth day, a sharp knock from Marcus ended her seclusion, a direct summons from the master. Though every nerve screamed to hide, she chose to face the contract she had signed. The time for pretending was over. She entered his inner sanctum, bracing for a lecture. Adrian was a silhouette of industry until he finally looked up. Without any preamble, he admitted his cruelty was unnecessary. When she asked for a real apology, he simply called his admission the objective truth of his failure. The unthinkable happens. A trembling plea for mercy. He mourns the venom spilled in the library and the sin of punishing her for simply being alive. His voice fractures as he confesses she is no longer a mere digit in his accounts. She has transformed into something far more dangerous and profound than a contract. Within 30 days, she has brought color to his monochromatic sepulcher, forcing a pulse into his hollow chest. The armor of his solitude is splintering. He admits that an eternity in the shadows made him forget the searing heat of truly being witnessed, not as a phantom, but as a living man. He is finally learning the agonizing toll of empathy. Her absence was a ghost he lacked the courage to name, for to love is to present your throat to the blade. She offers him sanctuary, but the ticking clock remains his tormentor. He feels the sting of his own madness, adoring a woman who is merely a traveler in his life. Exhaustion carves deep lines into his face as he closes the distance between them. He refuses to rot for the next 11 months in a cage constructed of his own fears. He begs for a rebirth, an existence beyond mere breath. When she searches for a name for them, he falters, hunting for a syllable that tastes like peace. She offers friendship, a bond that transcends the steel bars of their agreement. He weighs the word like a jagged stone, half expecting it to draw blood. He gives his consent, but only if they incinerate the business talk and speak in the raw, broken dialect of their souls. No more masks, only the unvarnished truth. She demands his hidden history, the ghosts haunting his library and the origin of his scars. He is paralyzed by the sharpness of her gaze. She leans into his space, declaring her intent to find the man buried beneath the wreckage of his dynasty. She seeks the beating heart, not the untouchable myth. To her, He is a labyrinth she is fated to navigate. When she questions if this violates their pact, he declares the old statutes dead. Their previous strategy left them both starving. A new covenant is forged, a partnership of radical honesty, a shared plunge into the dark, swirling waters of their connection. Her smile coaxed a rare, aching tenderness from his features. He requests her presence to witness his struggle at 2 tomorrow afternoon. She agrees without a heartbeat of hesitation. He warns her of the impending tempest of agony and defeat, yet she chooses the man who bleeds over the god who wears a mask. A flood of relief shatters his composure. They are now collaborators in the wreckage, a grim union that feels more real than anything he has ever known. She wears their brokenness like a crown. The following day, the training is a visceral descent into hell. She watches from the shadows as he is dragged through a corridor of torment. Basic movements turn into insurmountable mountains, leaving his limbs trembling with fatigue. He collapses repeatedly, but the concept of surrender is a language he never learned. Through choked curses and primal rage, he rises. Every time his body meets the floor, the command to resume is met with a defiant, agonizing return to his feet. A suffocating silence blankets the car on the journey home. Eventually, he finds the words to thank her for remaining by his side. When he asks if his fragility repulsed her, she reveals a deeper truth. Her respect has only deepened, for while others would have crumbled, he bleeds for every single inch of progress. One can call it what they wish, but this is not frailty. It is the definition of unfiltered endurance. Adrian views his struggle as a stain, but she reminds him that his internal tempests do not define his soul. A ghost of a smile remains as their lives find a poetic cadence. Therapy, breakfast, and secrets whispered at midnight. Adrian finally peels back the shadows of his childhood, recounting parents who traded his affection for social standing and cast him aside when his body broke. He has spent a lifetime navigating a sea of predators. In the quiet, Emily offers her own scars. The invisible middle child, a specter in her own family home. He describes the vultures who circled his sickbed and the woman who auctioned their forever for a tabloid headline. Emily speaks of the sterile success of her career and the total vacuum of her private life. As the rain hammers the glass, Adrian's voice turns to velvet. To me, you are utterly unforgettable. She hunts for a trace of a lie, suspecting pity, but he instantly extinguishes the doubt. This is not a charity, it is a confession. He tells her she is the rare soul who alters the very frequency of a room. She has no need for volume. The moment she speaks, the rest of the world simply turns to static. He recognizes in her a singular vision, the capacity to find beauty where others see only a void. She is a masterpiece of contradictions, as unbreakable as forged steel, yet fundamentally tender. If the world failed to see her, it was a poverty of their own sight, not her light. Emily wavers, but Adrian discards his pride, admitting his desire for a bearable year was merely a shield for a starving heart. The original script of their arrangement has been burned to ash. In the vacuum of what remains, the air grows heavy with the pressure of unsaid things. Locking his eyes onto hers, he delivers a truth more jarring than any stage tragedy. He craves her presence. She tries to hide behind the safety of the 11 months left on the clock, but he rejects the cold math of the law. He is looking at the horizon beyond their ending. His hands grip the leather chair until his knuckles turn to white marble, a physical sign of his internal rebellion. He knows this breach of their pact, evolving from a silent partner to an emotional anchor, defies every logic he owns. Yet she has become the sun around which his dark world orbits. The thought of her leaving feels less like a departure and more like the surgical removal of his own heart. Oxygen feels like a luxury as Emily watches him tear down his own walls. He is exposing his internal architecture, forsaking the vow of solitude he once held as holy. "This is already real to me," he confesses, begging for a future where she chooses the man beneath the ruins rather than the wealth or the name. Inside her, her heart hammers like a terrified bird, desperate for the open sky. For 42 days, she has endured the grueling work of keeping her distance while her soul sprinted toward him. She has spent her nights begging the stars to turn this fleeting moment into forever. "I just don't know," she whispers, a blow Adrian receives with the grace of a fallen king. He turns toward the storm outside, a ruler forced to face the one thing his power cannot buy. He treasures her sharp honesty over the hollow comfort of a fake victory. Emily crosses the silent void of the library, resting a hand on his shoulder where the tension feels like a coiled snake. The stillness is heavy and thick, an atmosphere where she must decide to either tie her soul to his or drift back into the shadows from which she came. "Give me 180 days," and she breathes into the quiet. Adrian carries the weight of his uncertainty like a physical cross, yet Emily provides a devastating truth. She cannot tell if this is real love or just the intoxication of finally being seen. Refusing the mercy of a beautiful lie, she holds his shoulder to keep them both anchored. It is a moment of terrifying, raw human connection. She promises a final answer at the 6-month mark, a future free of ghosts and doubt. When Adrian asks if he is meant to simply wait, she offers him the chance to find someone less broken. He does not flinch. He finds more worth in her shattered, honest pieces than in any polished perfection. He is completely lost in her, oblivious to the judgment of the world. The hourglass has been turned. Before she leaves, Emily leans in to press a soft kiss to his forehead, leaving the powerful Adrian Volkov frozen in time. When he asks for a name for the gesture, she guards her heart with the word friendship. Adrian is left in a state of emotional vertigo. He speaks the languages of war and profit fluently, but friend is a dialect he has never known. Emily flees before the electric tension sets the room ablaze. Adrian holds her one last time with a quiet "thank you," a debt paid to the truth now hanging between them. This is not the calculated move of a titan. It is the raw hunger of a man facing the light. It is a fragile new crack in his stone skin, and she vanishes into the dark hall before the gravity of the moment can drown them. Behind her closed door, her heart echoes like a frantic drum. She has bartered for half a year of clarity, but in the marrow of her bones, the verdict has already been signed. Standing in the pitch-black corridor, Emily realizes the deadline is just a prop on a stage. She has already started her descent, and the fall is as hauntingly beautiful as it is ruinous. It is a fundamental law of her universe now. She is in love with the giant that is Adrian Volkov. This moment is either the first brushstroke of a masterpiece or the opening lines of a tragedy. The 6-month horizon hangs over them like a darkening sky. Suddenly, the days are no longer just numbers on a page. They are the final rhythmic beats of a life she is terrified to lose. Every shared breath and heavy glance makes their professional wall look like a transparent lie. 90 days vanish in a fever dream of closeness, with Emily still playing the part of the cautious soul, perhaps too terrified of her own shadows to claim her happiness. They are at breakfast when Marcus enters, his face a mask of looming catastrophe. Their sanctuary has been compromised. "Sir, we have a problem." Marcus says, his tone cold and hollow. Adrian's cup hits the table with the violence of a gunshot. The ghost of his past has taken shape as a redhead with a heart made of venom. Scarlet has arrived at the gate, and she is hunting for blood. Emily feels the earth vanish beneath her. Adrian's reply is a low, predatory growl as he orders her immediate removal. Scarlet is a storm that refuses to be turned away, and Adrian is a heartbeat from summoning the guard. Sensing the fuse is lit, Emily pushes for a direct strike. Adrian's knuckles are white against his fine china, a silent war of restraint. He knows her touch only turns grace to ash. Emily insists on killing the spark before the house burns down. Adrian yields but keeps Emily close as a shield. He knows Scarlet's mental games. She will try to rot Emily's mind with poisonous, twisted histories. He demands the narrative remain his own, not some malicious reflection. In his private sanctuary, the collision of a broken past and a fragile hope begins. Scarlet haze glides in, a vision in blood-red silk. She carries the entitlement of an exiled queen reclaiming a crown she never lost, her eyes stripping the room bare with cold, predatory intent. She has not come for peace. Her smile is a shard of glass catching the moon. Brace for the fall. Scarlet strikes first with a jagged remark about his chair before turning her fangs toward Emily. She paints her as a cheap substitute, a mere worker who stumbled into a world she cannot grasp. The insults are precise, surgical. Adrian grants her exactly 300 seconds before he has her dragged out. Adrian calls her a ghost, but Scarlet claims their bond is undead. She stares into Emily's soul, revealing their marriage was born of pure, cold spite. Imagine the horror of being a blade, forged only to pierce a lover's heart. Scarlet is here to tear their world apart, one syllable at a time. Adrian frames the past as a cold business move, but Scarlet has already pulled the pin. She asks Emily if she knows the rot beneath their failed wedding, ready to show the monster inside him. He orders her silence, but the wound is open. She wants Emily to feel the invisible chains he keeps. Scarlet spins a tale of tyranny. On their wedding eve, Adrian vowed to burn her family's name to the ground if she fled. In her story, he wanted total control of her spirit. Emily looks at him, the poison of doubt taking root. Is this the man she let inside her walls? Adrian admits to the ruthlessness. He confirms the price for breaking his house's word, but calls her ownership story a lie she's telling herself. His hands shake against the wheels of his chair. Emily is lost in the fog. In a world of mirrors, who do you trust when truth is the killing edge? Scarlet presses on, but Adrian pivots. He reminds her she was no victim. She was a shark who wanted his name for the weight of it. When his accident stole his luster, she tried to run. Adrian simply made sure she knew that a contract signed in blood is never truly broken. He speaks as a man of facts who will not be a footstool. He demands the real reason for this visit, knowing it is not love. It is a shakedown. Scarlet drops the grieving act, her eyes turning flat and predatory. The siren's mask slips, revealing the cold heart of a killer. Scarlet wants her check. She demands the payoff, $2 million now and $3 million later. Adrian's laugh is a hollow, bitter thing. He will not pay for a ghost of a wedding, but Scarlet sneers that he owes her for the shame of being replaced by a nobody. Scarlet's fury is a fever. Her status is gone while the world pities her replacement. She wants a king's ransom for her bruised pride. The arrogance is staggering. She thinks she can put a price on the air she breathes as she leaves his life. Adrian offers her the door. He will not fund her hate. But Scarlet has one last card, She will leak the fake marriage to the world. If the public sees their $5 million lie, his name will die. Emily feels the floor give way beneath her feet. Scarlett shows the proof, the ledger of the $5 million move and the 1-year end date. She calls Emily a tool used to fix a broken name. She is ready to burn his empire to the ground for the money. This is not a talk. It is a ransom. The air in the room is heavy enough to break ribs. Emily's heart hammers in her throat while Adrian plays a lethal hand. He is weighing her silence against the death of everything he built. Every tick of the clock is a slow fall toward ruin. Adrian's backstep is a trap. He offers $500,000, pocket change to him, as a final biting end. He treats her like a common thief, using his wealth with the cold edge of a scalpel. But the master has a kill shot. The sins of her family. 5 years of hidden filth will bury her father by tomorrow. Caught in his web, she takes the $500,000, her eyes burning with a silent, helpless hate. The play ends as Marcus starts the wire. Adrian tosses her aside like a dead match. As she goes, she whispers a cold curse. Good luck, you will need it. She leaves nothing but the scent of perfume and the rot of failure. The door clicks shut, ending the war. Emily is stunned by the cold cash, but to Adrian, it was just a bill to pay. He stares into the gray sky, a man made of secrets. You have to wonder what ghosts still live in that hollow chest. Look at the man behind the mask. The stakes could not be higher. He knows his kingdom is made of glass. Yet beneath the stone face, he is terrified. Not for his gold, but for the safety of the woman he pretends to ignore. The world sees their bond as a script, but he uses that lie as a wall. Emily sees the cost now. He threw away $500,000 just to keep her from the fire. This is not ego. It is a soul laid bare. The king tries to act the part, calling her his. But when Emily fights, he flinches, hiding his bleeding heart behind a mask of duty. We see the cracks in the stone, Adrian. The human is coming out. She asks if she is a person or just a line on a page. The weight breaks him. Adrian shows her a desert of the soul, admitting their life is just 2 lonely shadows crossing in the dark. His life is a map of wounds, a tower of betrayals from the ones who should have stayed. He is just waiting, counting down these 9 months until she leaves him like everyone else. When Emily hopes for more, he strikes with a blade. He calls her love a sick survival reflex, mocking her as a prisoner of her own fear. It is a cruel, sharp blow meant to save her from himself. He turns her kindness into a curse, calling her love a symptom. He thinks she is just painting the walls of her cell. He is a master of destroying his own happiness before the world can take it from him. Then he hits her with the killing word. She is only here for the gold. He dares her to find one part of his broken ghost that she wants. Once the billions are gone, her world goes white. The words die in her throat, choked by his hate. Adrian stands there like an empty shell. He walks back into his cold, dark study, leaving her in the wreckage. In the silence of the books, she falls apart. His words have poisoned her mind. Is she a woman in love, or just a bird that has grown to love the gold of its cage? She tries to find the logic in the pull she feels. Maybe she did sell herself for a rich man's game. The doubt eats her alive, leaving her hollow and lost in the dark. The hours crawl by in a painful wait. At 10 o'clock, Marcus brings the news. The master of the house is in the gym, putting himself through a 4-hour cycle of brutal physical hell. Marcus fears he is going to snap. Emily finds him there, a fallen king fighting iron, pushing his body until it breaks. He is soaked in sweat, the physical proof of the war inside him. A jagged breath escapes as he vows to scrub the rot of inadequacy from his soul. His knees buckle again and again, a desperate molting of past shames. He is a cinematic tragedy, a man pursued by the dark silhouette of himself. The ghosts of yesterday are claiming their victory. The memory of his first heartbreak haunts him as he fails her again. He is drowning in a private abyss. She drops to the floor, her voice a fragile plea for him to stop before his spirit shatters his own bones. He views this torture as the required tithe for pulling her into his ruin. Slowly, the internal fortifications vanish. He whispers the terrifying reality. He is a captive of his own longing for her. The frozen king is finally consumed by his own internal fire. The persona lies in pieces. He confesses that his venom was merely a shield to protect her from his internal wreckage. Her essence devours him, and that remains his deepest terror. The conviction that everyone he cherishes eventually vanishes into the night. He sees the ticking clock on their legal bond, yet chooses to love her anyway. She calls him a magnificent fool, silencing his logic with the kiss that anchors him to the earth. This is the spark that ignites months of suffocating star-crossed hunger. She pours a lifetime of silent promises into that single contact. He stands motionless, a statue caught in a storm, before finally giving in to the rush. When the air returns, she admits her devotion is a mountain no language could ever fully describe. She is captivated by his heavy silence, his iron resolve, and the way he tucks his softness away between yellowed pages. She is the sole witness to the porcelain man hidden behind the fortress the public sees. She cherishes how he instinctively shields her from the gale. Her choice to stay has nothing to do with the bank account or the title. Their spirits have fused into one. 180 days felt like a century to keep such a secret buried. The clock seems to stop its ticking. He pulls her back for a kiss that tastes of salvation, finally accepting the impossible truth that she is his co-pilot for the long trek through the darkness. He asks a quiet, broken question. Can she truly find beauty in a man so ruined? Her answer is a soft touch against his scars. For the first time, the man of granite breaks, his tears falling freely in the sanctuary of her touch. The gym transforms into a temple where the world outside ceases to exist. He admits he is a novice in the art of affection, but she swears they have a lifetime to master the craft of being whole. He is a man starving, and she is his only feast. She whispers that they should maintain their distance for the sake of the staff, but he has no intention of returning to the cold isolation of his solitary room. He kills her hesitation with a kiss that feels like a new sun rising. It is the true prologue of their lives. They finally find rest, but only after he has bled his heart dry of every hidden ghost. She drifts into a dreamless sleep, her phone forgotten in the shadows. All that exists is the heavy realization that the terrifying Adrian Volkov is now her most devoted protector. By the first light of dawn, he is already watching her, his features softened by a peace she has never seen. He confesses that sleep was a ghost he didn't care to chase, his mind replaying the electric pulse of their union. The connection is a two-way street. They stand as peers looking out at a new dawn. He takes her palm in his, forging a bond stronger than any blade. She laughs, a bright sound in the quiet, demanding coffee before they tackle their shared destiny. It is a fragile, raw beginning, yet it feels like the only real thing in the world. His rare smile is a masterclass in relief. The spell breaks when Marcus enters, immediately reading the heavy atmosphere of a contract that has become a blood oath. He barks an order for privacy, but Marcus gets the parting shot. The debt is settled, and Scarlet is a ghost. He exits with a smirk, having just collected $50 on a wager about their unavoidable collision. He is indifferent to the whispers of the help. He asks if she is prepared for the glare of the world. The mask has fallen away. The public will soon see the Volkov king has knelt for her, and the shockwaves will be massive. She welcomes the coming storm, stating their beautiful mess is worth any cost. She claims him with a kiss of pure possession. He pulls her into his lap, the desk and his empire forgotten, finding his only true kingdom in her. They retreat into the silence of their bond, and those 3 words pass his lips again. He vows to repeat them until they are the only pulse she feels. She smiles, knowing that song will never grow old. She mirrors his vow, embracing his every flaw. They spend the hours sketching a life of travel, books, and the slow climb of his recovery. A battle that now feels like a victory because they fight it together. He notes that the household already feels the change in the air. She finds a wicked joy in the scandal they are about to cause. She tries to leave for work, but he is a man reborn, pleading for just 5 more minutes of her light. He is an addict, and she is his fix. They work with the doors thrown open, sharing caffeine and stolen touches. It is a domestic paradise for a soldier who only ever understood the cadence of the battlefield. This is the grand prize, the simple grace of being chosen. A man of 1,000 masks finally stripped himself bare for her. It isn't a nursery rhyme, it is a visceral, breathing proof of what love can build from the rubble. 9 months remain on the paper they signed, but the ink is now a relic of a past life. They are no longer playing parts in a cold script. They are explorers learning the difficult, gorgeous language of a shared soul. The path is jagged. Occasionally, he still hides behind his cold, professional shell, but they are pouring a new foundation. 30 days later, her things are moved into his wing, making her presence as permanent as the stones of the house. He remains the ultimate protector, carving out a sanctuary for her right beside his own. They spend the midnight hours talking until the world fades, falling asleep in a perfect shared rhythm. Her entire existence has been rewritten. The days of their cold business deal are a distant memory. As she reads by the fire, the wall he built around himself vanishes, leaving only a raw, whispered confession of the heavy sins he carries on his shoulders. She prepares for a sharp word, but finds a lifeline instead. In the shadows, a secret alliance with James has brought the dream of his freedom within reach, making her heart hammer against her ribs like a trapped bird. It is a fragile hope where walking again is a distant star, yet the act of standing becomes their shared epic. Still, a flicker of dread haunts his eyes, the terror of promising a future that might only end in a fall. The shadow of the man he was still haunts the hallways, but she is the blade that cuts the cord to that morning. She tells him he owes nothing to his past self. If the world wants a ghost, let it haunt someone else. He asks the question that eats at him. Does his broken body make him less in her eyes? Her answer is a strike to the heart. She fell for the soul, not the stride. Sitting or standing, he is her gravity, and he pulls her into a silent iron grip. He muses on how a desperate hunt for a nurse became his greatest win. Lost in a rare moment of peace, the spell is shattered by the shrill, frantic vibration of Rachel's phone calls. His sister-in-law promises a war at his doorstep, but he doesn't blink. He invites the storm, preferring to look his enemy in the eye rather than fighting through the cold glass of a screen. The idea of him facing her family leaves her breathless. To him, it is a grand theater, a necessary performance where he plans to use his natural gravity to crush their doubts in a single evening. He laughs at the irony. A trader of secrets who bought her service, only to lose his own spirit in the bargain. 72 hours later, the family arrives, looking less like guests and more like a boarding party. She is a tangle of nerves, trying to explain the gold-leafed world she now inhabits. Her sister arrives like a lightning strike, while their mother seems smothered by the sheer opulence of the Volkov estate. The air turns cold with their judgment of her disappearance into this stone fortress. When her mother tries to frame their love, As a pact between strangers, she counters with a strength she never knew she possessed. She leads them into the heart of the lair, trying to quiet the thunder. While her sister is blinded by the wealth, her mother's eyes are like a cold scalpel searching for the rot beneath the gilding. The interrogation becomes a surgical strike as they ask how she could love a man of the shadows. Her mother is haunted by the violence of his world, but she is met with the quiet truth that this prison is the only place she has ever been free. A simple answer isn't enough. She looks her mother in the eye with a gaze like steel, explaining that she sees past the power to the map of scars he wears, a landscape of every wound that made him who he is. She describes his work as a shield from the pain of the world and his books as a medicine for the heavy crown he carries. He fears love because he expects the exit, but he cherishes her for her heart, not her hands. A long silence hangs in the air until her sister finally sees the undeniable electric hum of true devotion. 4 months is just a heartbeat, a sudden climb into a love that they can barely find the words to name. Their whispers suggest she is drowning in his labyrinth, a victim of his mental chess. She fights the shadow of manipulation, yet as the judgment grows, she realizes the half measures must die. The bedrock of their pact must be bared. The truth hits with the force of a burial shroud. $5 million to simulate a marriage for 365 days. The temperature plummets as her sister's face pales with pity, while their mother mourns a daughter traded away like silver. They paint him as a beast and her as the prey, but in the sterile lines of that contract, she found a fortress. No longer the invisible child, she sheds the skin of an unwanted daughter, claiming the light this transaction finally cast upon her. What began as a cold balance sheet has bled into an intimate bond, a change she will not repent for. Her sister spits back the bitter truth of being a mercenary in a house of shadows, a critique that rings with a haunting resonance. She pivots the glass, dissecting their own hollow unions bought with social safety. The strike is surgical, blurring the lines between their sanctioned hypocrisy and her own desperate, calculated grab for a life worth living. They mock the love as a convenient fairy tale, certain it will shatter once the ink fades. But she remains unshaken. The paper is merely a relic when their hearts have already crossed the Rubicon, leaving the critics to their petty doubts. She guards her faith in him, a treasure forged through daily acts of honesty. Her sister remains cold, insisting that men with his stain don't find salvation. They only learn to wear their masks with more lethal grace. She warns her that she is merely applauding a theater of lies, a costume meant to entrap. Before the air can ignite, his voice cuts through the room, sharp, low, and heavy with the weight of an approaching storm. He doesn't enter with a plea for mercy, but with a terrifying validation of their darkest fears. He lays out the ghosts of his past, the ruined lives that paved his road to power, refusing to wipe the crimson from his palms. Facing the sister, he speaks of the grueling labor of becoming a man worthy of a second chance. He admits he might fall, yet he swears that his pursuit of the light is fueled solely by the woman who dared to stand in his shadow. Pressed to reveal a sin that would freeze the blood, he seeks her eyes for a silent blessing before unearthing a nightmare from 6 years ago. It is a tale of betrayal met with a calculated, absolute annihilation. He recounts the methodical erasure of an enemy, not a simple end, but the complete disintegration of a human being's soul and legacy. It was an act of power performed with the chilling precision of a machine. The victim's subsequent fall was a tragedy of his own making, a debt he felt no remorse for then. He confesses that this frost is his core nature, leaving the room paralyzed in a sudden, suffocating chill. A heavy grief settles in her chest, though no shock remains, only a sharp, crystalline clarity. As her mother cries out against the madness, he simply bows his head, a monster attempting the impossible climb toward humanity. Questioned on how she can stomach such a pest, she admits her soul recoils from the cruelty. She offers no excuses for his history. She only sees the bleeding feet of a man trying to speak a love he was never taught. She bets her life on the redemption of his power, a change ignited by the weight of her hand in his. Standing amidst the ruins of his name, she anchors herself not to the ghost he was, but the man he is becoming. Her kin reject the bond as a fever dream, refusing to watch her waste her youth on a merchant of death. Her mother turns to leave, unable to reconcile her child's peace with the blood on the threshold. She dares him to prove his love by letting her go, by returning her to the safety of the mundane. He acknowledges she deserves a saint, yet his own darkness clings to her, for she is the only flame left in his world. A final, haunting warning about the fragility of the human spirit echoes as they walk out. The ensuing silence is vast, broken only by his dry, cinematic remark on the day's high drama, hiding the fracture in his heart. As the shadows stretch, he drops the final veil. He will give her nothing but the jagged, unvarnished truth of his brokenness. He watches her closely, measuring the tremors of the internal hurricane they just endured together. She considers her mother's prayer for a simple, quiet life, only to cast it aside. To her, a safe life is a hollow one, and she finds his complicated darkness far more vital than the shallow peace of the ordinary. They embrace their shared madness, two outcasts building a home in the wreckage. He sees her as a grace he hasn't earned, but she sees a soul worth the war, sealed with a kiss that tastes of a desperate final oath. He predicts a future of long shadows and nights of terror, yet she meets his gaze with a stubborn, unbreakable resolve. Together they prepare to walk through the debris of their lives, one agonizingly honest day at a time. A tragic irony colors her role as the saint in a den of vipers, a role she plays with a wry smile. He responds with a rare ghost of a laugh, acknowledging's beautiful broken absurdity of the world they've forged. They linger in that quiet hour before the night, a single shadow against the world. Yet, 90 days later, the skeletons would scream. The press begins its feast with a leaked document. A $5 million sale, a fake vow, and a masterfully staged lie. Morning coffee is served with the smell of a digital burning, a tabloid hit piece designed to drown them both. She watches their shared sanctuary crumble under the ink, while he becomes a statue of icy rage. Precise, silent, and lethally still, he tastes the venom in every word. Only Scarlet could paint him as a dealer of souls. He realizes he left a gap in his armor for a snake. He summons Marcus, his mind already weaving a shroud of strategy to protect his throne from the rising heat. Marcus arrives with a legal arsenal, but Adrian knows the law is a slow weapon. A court case is just fresh meat for the wolves. They decide to step into the fire, taking back the narrative before the world finishes burning their peace. The play is a desperate one. Total, brutal honesty. They will admit the silver that bought the union while swearing to the love that grew in the dark. She refuses to hide, remaining the calm eye of the hurricane as the lies swirl. He warns her the world will see her as a victim or a whore. She doesn't care for their labels. She is ready to tell the real story. That afternoon, they walk toward the blinding, predatory flashes of the public eye. Marcus gathers the hungriest wolves of the press. She is a vision of cold navy silk, while he stands with the frozen power of a man who has nothing left to lose. As the shutters fire like executioners, his baritone voice drops, anchoring the chaos. He confesses the clinical nature of their start. A cold transaction for a needed peace. It was a move of pure utility. But as he looks at her, the earth shifts. She takes the lead, her voice steady as she describes the slow, painful birth of their love. She gives them the raw, bleeding truth. Beauty bloomed from the wreckage of their pact. The mask is gone, replaced by the chaotic collision of two souls. The press sneers, but she remains like ice, dismantling their questions with the grace of an empress. She doesn't deny the millions or the 12-month clock. Instead, she stares into the lens, explaining she stayed because he truly saw her. He cherished her beyond any paper agreement, and she would take this public fire over a comfortable lie. He echoes her words, admitting his lack of mercy in business, but naming her as his only light. He tells the world their bond is steel. The message is lethal. Anyone trying to break them must first answer to him. As the stage lights fade, she finally lets out a breath. The internet has become a coliseum of judgment. Her phone is a graveyard of messages from the ghosts of her past, all hoping to taste a piece of her new tragic fame. She shuts out the world, listening only to Rachel, who calls her a beautiful kind of crazy. Inside the manor, he notes the target they've drawn on their chests. Truth costs everything, and they have just paid the price in full. Their unity is a middle finger to those who tried to kill them. By making their secrets their weapons, they have disarmed Scarlet entirely. He offers a soft kiss, promising that without the weight of the lie, they are finally free to just be. The following weeks unfold like a slow-motion car crash of public vitriol and lens flares. Rivals sharpen their knives, turning the scandal into a corporate guillotine. Behind heavy iron gates, they huddle in the shadows, waiting for the vultures to find a fresher scent and the noise to die down. Half a year drags by before the most agonizing act begins. Adrian stands in the clinical glare at the rehab suite, sweat beading like blood on his forehead. After 730 days, shackled to a throne of wheels, the fallen king fights to plant his feet on solid earth. Emily stares, her book forgotten as the room grows suffocating. On cue from James, Adrian's knuckles turn bone white against the cold steel bars. He is drowning in the fear of falling, but James barks at him to silence his mind and let his scars do the heavy lifting. With a guttural roar of defiance, he lunges toward the sky. It is a savage war against his own broken nerves, but suddenly he is upright. His legs hold. A sound escapes him, a jagged, holy wreckage of a sob and a shout, the anthem of a ghost returning to life. Gravity wins after only 10 seconds, but his face glows with a terrifying light. In a voice cracked and thin, he asks if she caught the moment. Emily is already lost to her tears, whispering that this few heartbeats were the most beautiful thing she has ever witnessed. After that breakthrough, his recovery moves with the violence of a flood. Seconds stretch into minutes, then into freedom. Within 90 days, he cuts across the room. 11 jagged, independent steps. It is the living proof that the most shattered glass can still catch the light. During quiet drive home, Emily's voice trembles with awe. He tries to dismiss the miracle as simple physics, but she won't let him. She insists he has finally killed the ghost of his own ruin. He is a man reborn from the ash, and that is his only real legacy. Adrian's iron will finally cracks, admitting he would still be rotting in the dark if not for her. She was the only thing worth the agony. But that night, he shatters the walls between them, begging her to move her things into his suite and truly stay. 547 days felt like a life sentence. He craves her presence from the first blue light of dawn to the final stroke of midnight. No more masks or staged performances. He wants their lives to bleed together until you cannot tell where one ends and the other begins. Emily says yes before the words even leave his lips. Her whole world boils down to a few crates of stories and a single photo of her father. She steps into the hollow spaces of his life, turning a cold fortress into a sanctuary she never thought she would find. His bedroom is a dark monument to power and cold shadows, but she begins to bleed the hardness out of it. She moves her things, shifting the very air to match her soul, and Adrian just watches from the corner, his eyes reflecting a terrifying quiet peace. He asks with a smirk if he still has any authority in his own home. She tells him flatly that his version of order is a disaster. He tries to put on his cold executive mask, but she just laughs, reminding him he cannot even find his glasses without her help. He pulls her close, whispering that she is the only lens he uses to see the world. It is his silent confession that she is the only thing keeping him grounded. He asks for forever, and she seals the deal with a kiss of total, mutual defeat. They settle into the quiet rhythm of cold dinners and old movies, the boring, perfect life she once thought was a fairy tale. At midnight, he finally utters those 3 heavy words. She just smiles, telling him she has heard them beating in his chest for months. There is a visible relief in him when she says it back. She pledges 50 years of those words, a vow for every sunrise. Adrian is paralyzed by the weight of her promise, telling her to map out their whole future because he is not going anywhere. The Titan keeps his poker face, claiming her leaving would just be a mess for the accountants, a romantic heart hiding behind a balance sheet. 1 year later, on their anniversary, he still stares at her like she is a mystery he will never solve. He hands her the ultimate freedom, the contract torn to white confetti. She is legally a ghost to him now, yet she does not move toward the door. She kills his talk of old debts with a kiss, choosing him all over again, this time for real. Now that the paperwork is dead, Adrian demands a real ceremony. No boardroom politics or staged alliances, just a few people and a promise that means something. He is putting her before the throne, and the weight of it brings blood-warm tears to his eyes. He confesses that the monster was just a suit of armor he wore to survive. Now he asks the only question that matters. Will she stand with him when the world tries to burn them down? Her yes hits him before he can finish the sentence. 8 weeks later, the garden transforms into a quiet cathedral for their union. Only the inner circle remains. The ghosts of their past have finally retreated, leaving Emily in a gown that finally belongs to her own story, not anyone else's. He stands at the altar, leaning hard on his cane. His whole body hums with the agony of standing, but he stays upright for the sake of his light. For 1 crystalline second, the wind stops and the world holds its breath. The theater is over, the masks have been burned. They are just 2 survivors standing in the wreckage. When she speaks her vows, her voice is an iron pillar. They are bound together again. But this time, the stitches are made of blood and truth. The air feels pure tonight. Even the doubters can see the raw honesty bleeding from his eyes. He has peeled off the skin of the predator, standing there as a man made whole, trading his iron fist for a hand that only knows how to hold her. It is clear to everyone, she is the very oxygen in his lungs. This is a rebirth forged in a furnace of tragedy. Emily takes her place beside her king, realizing that every nightmare she endured was just the path to this hard-won peace. Exhaustion begins to pull at him, but his old-world grace never wavers as he presses his lips to her knuckles. He whispers a jagged thank you, humbled that she found the human beneath the beast when he was at his lowest point. He mutters that he does not deserve this kind of grace, but she will not hear it. As the night air turns sharp and cold, he asks for one final dance, even though his body is screaming that it has nothing left to give. Their movement is a slow, halting melody where her strength becomes his singular support. Under the white glow of the moon, the noise of the world fades out, leaving only the quiet bones of a sanctuary they built for 2. He keeps whispering vows of eternal loyalty, still trying to prove her choice was right. But she does not need words. His penance is written in his skin. Every jagged scar is a silent, permanent proof of the man he became for her. A cold house finally becomes a home. As the first light of dawn breaks, he looks at her with a holy kind of reverence and offers a simple greeting that changes everything. "Good morning, Mrs. Volkov." It is the perfect, quiet end to their war. They disappear into the quiet poetry of a normal life. Picture a man who once built empires of shadow, now limping through a sun-drenched garden with a cane, finding a strange, holy peace in the mundane. It is the ultimate middle finger to his violent past. In the soft rhythm of shared coffee and half-read books, Emily finds a peace that should not exist. The woman who once planned other people's weddings has become the absolute foundation of the entire Volkov legacy. She finds a dark irony in how they started. He, however, often falls into a heavy silence, terrified by the razor-thin line between the life they have and a world where they remained strangers forever. He calls this quiet peace his greatest victory. The blood and thunder of their beginning is nothing compared to the softness of their end. She falls asleep with her head on his heart, anchored to the world by his steady, rhythmic pulse. This broken, beautiful bond made every single scar worth it. We see now that love is not just a feeling. It is a relentless, daily choice made in the middle of the storm and the heavy silence that follows. Their promise is a machine that never stops. This is no clean fairy tale. It is a kingdom built from the raw iron of survival. The Titan and his queen. The story has finally come full circle.